Rowan found her on a night that smelled like wet ash and salt, the kind of night where the river carried the city's secrets downstream and pretended it was just current. Brineford was built on old stone and older grudges, the streets were narrow enough that two shoulders had to negotiate passage, and the lanterns burned whale oil that made everything look jaundiced, like the world itself was slightly sick. He wasn't supposed to be out. Not after closing the locksmith shop, not after counting the coins, not after the familiar quiet settled in the rooms above the shop, quiet like a hand pressed over the mouth of a screaming thing. But grief had a schedule, and it liked to show up when Rowan was weakest. Tonight it had chosen to crawl up his throat when he passed the bakery window and saw, in the glass, the shape of a woman he'd once loved reflected behind him. He turned too fast. The reflection broke into shadow. And then he saw her, curled in the hollow between his shop's stone foundation and the alley wall, as if the city had grown a bruise and tried to hide it. She was tall, even hunched, limbs folded tight, knees tucked to her chest. Her skin, blue, but not the painted blue of street performers, was the color of deep ocean water when moonlight hits it. Firelight from a nearby brazier licked across her and caught the faint, obsidian tracings along her cheekbones and shoulders, scales so subtle they looked like jewelry someone had etched into living skin. Her horns arced back in graceful curves, too polished to be an accident, but dulled by grime. Dark hair spilled over her arms with a metallic sheen, like a raven's feather caught between fingers. She didn't look up at the sound of Rowan's boots until he stopped directly in front of her. When she did, the alley seemed to sharpen. Amber eyes. Slit pupils. Not wild, focused. The eyes of something that had learned to measure threats because threats were what the world offered for free. Rowan's breath fogged. "Hey," he said, and hated how small it sounded. She didn't move. Her nostrils flared once, like she was tasting him. The smell in the alley was sour, damp stone, rotting cabbage, old piss. Under it, something else, smoke and spice and copper. Blood, maybe. Or the memory of it. "You're hurt," Rowan said, because his mouth kept choosing honesty even when his brain begged for silence. Her lips parted. Full, cracked at the corners. "Not fresh," she rasped. The words carried an accent that turned edges soft and vowels sharp. "It will close." Rowan looked down at her hands. Long fingers. Clean nails, oddly, as if she'd kept at least that one habit alive. The rest of her skirt, her shirt, the wrap at her waist, was travel-worn, patched, and damp through. Someone had slept outside. Someone with horns. Someone Brineford would pretend not to see. "I have stew," Rowan blurted. Then immediately wished he could shove the sentence back down his throat. People didn't offer stew to strangers with dragon blood and hungry eyes. People didn't offer anything. People crossed the street and muttered prayers and pretended their hands weren't shaking. Her gaze flicked to his left hand, to the keyring clipped at his belt, to the small hammer in his apron pocket. Not a weapon. Tools. But tools could kill, if you knew how. "Why?" she asked. The word came out like a blade being tested. Rowan swallowed. "Because you're starving." He forced himself to say the ugly part out loud. "And because it's cold, and my wife is dead, and I'm tired of watching people die near my door like it's normal." Her throat worked. A swallow without saliva. "Kindness," she said slowly, like she was pronouncing a foreign religion. "In this city. It has hooks. Maybe." Rowan's voice went rough. "But my hooks are boring. I need my floors scrubbed. My shop's a disaster. And if you want food, you can have it. If you want work, you can earn more. If you want to leave, you can leave." The Drakanis woman stared at him, and in her stare was 1,000 calculations, distance to the street, the angle of his shoulders, whether his eyes darted like liar's eyes. At last, she unfolded just enough to stand. Even thin and shaking, she rose with an elegance that made the alley seem too small for her. She was taller than Rowan by half a head. Up close, the scales along her cheekbones caught the lantern's glow like obsidian dust. She smelled like smoke, rain, and the bitter edge of hunger. "What is your name?" she asked. "Rowan." His throat tightened as if the name belonged to someone else. "And you?" A pause. Then, soft as a vow. "Vaelyra." Rowan nodded toward his door. "Come in, Vaelyra. Before Brineford notices you exist." Her eyes slid past him, down the street, where a pair of night watchmen ambled, bored and loud. One of them laughed too sharply, the way men laughed when they wanted the world to know they could. Vaelyra stepped closer to Rowan's door. And the watchman's laughter died mid-breath, as if something unseen had just looked back at them. Rowan's shop smelled like iron filings and oiled wood, the dependable sense of a life built on small precise solutions. Tumblers, pins, keys. The bell over the door didn't ring when he ushered Vaelyra in. Rowan had muffled it years ago because the sound had started waking him in the night after Mara died, like a tiny silver scream reminding him he was alone. He flicked the lamp to life. The flame caught, danced, and painted Vaelyra in gold. For a moment the blue of her skin warmed toward cobalt, and the shadow under her horns made her look like something out of the old chapel murals. Saints and demons sharing the same bones, just different stories slapped on top. "Sit," Rowan said, pointing at the stool by the counter. Vaelyra did not sit. She positioned herself where she could see the door, the back stairwell, and the window. Her shoulders stayed loose, but her weight balanced on the balls of her feet, like she could become motion without warning. Rowan pretended not to notice. He headed to the kitchen nook behind the workbench. Really just a stove, a pot, and a shelf of chipped bowls. He lifted the lid on the stew pot he'd left simmering, and the scent of onions and pepper and cheap beef rolled out, thick enough to feel like a blanket. Vaelyra's nostrils flared again. Hunger sharpened her posture. Not desperation, control. The kind of restraint that took effort, like holding a trembling glass steady. Rowan ladled stew into a bowl. The spoon clinked against ceramic. The sound felt too loud, too intimate. He carried it to her carefully, as if sudden movements might spook her. As if she were a feral cat. As if he had any right to think of her that way. He placed the bowl on the counter between them and stepped back. "Eat." Vaelyra stared at it as if it might leap up and bite her. "You do not fear poisoning me?" she asked. Rowan blinked. "Why would I poison you?" Her eyes narrowed. "To see what my blood does. To sell it. She cut herself off, jaw tightening like she'd bitten her own tongue. Rowan's stomach turned. Brineford had a market for everything. Even people. Especially people. He picked up his own bowl, smaller, mostly broth, and took a slow spoonful. He made a point of chewing, swallowing, letting her watch him live. Then he nudged the bowl toward her. Vaelyra's fingers hovered. Then, finally, they closed around the bowl. She lifted it with both hands, careful not to spill a drop. Her first sip was cautious, then her eyes fluttered shut for half a heartbeat, like the heat hurt in a good way. She ate slowly. Every swallow looked like a decision. Rowan leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and let himself watch. Not her curves, not her horns, though they were impossible to ignore. He watched the way her shoulders eased a fraction as warmth reached her stomach. He watched the way her gaze softened from threat to room. He watched because it felt like witnessing a candle catching. When she finished, Rowan poured her another bowl without asking. Vaelyra stiffened. "I have not." "Don't," Rowan said quietly. "Don't turn it into a debt before it needs to be. Just eat." Her lips pressed together, pride and hunger wrestling. Hunger won. She ate again, slower, like she was trying to memorize the flavor for later when she'd have nothing. When the bowl was empty, she set it down with a reverence that startled him. Then she looked around the shop, the cluttered counter, the scattering of brass shavings, the tools left out like Rowan had simply stopped caring where things belonged. "This place," she said, voice steadier now. "It is, neglected." Rowan exhaled. "Yeah. Your mate died," Vaelyra said. Not a question. A statement shaped by scent and observation. Rowan's fingers dug into his own arms. "My wife. Mara." Vaelyra tilted her head. The movement made her horns catch the lamplight, crown-like. "Mara. The name tastes warm." Rowan almost laughed, but it caught in his throat and became something close to a sob. He cleared his throat hard enough to hurt. "I have a spare room. Bed. Blanket. No locks on the inside, but I can fix that if you want. In exchange, I need cleaning. Sweeping. Scrubbing. The kind of work I keep telling myself I'll do tomorrow." Vaelyra's amber eyes held his. "And if I say no?" "Then you leave fed," Rowan said. "And Brineford goes back to pretending it isn't cruel." She stared for a long time, and Rowan felt the city pressing in through the window glass, waiting to see if he would flinch. At last, Vaelyra nodded once. "I will clean. I will not be touched." Rowan's jaw tightened. He hated the world for making her say it out loud. "Agreed," he said. "You set the terms. I keep them." Vaelyra's shoulders dropped by a thread, relief she tried to hide. "Then I will stay. For one night." Rowan motioned toward the stairs. "Up. I'll show you the room." Vaelyra followed, silent as smoke. Halfway up, she paused and glanced back at the shop, at the stew pot, at Rowan's hands. "You said, kindness has hooks," she murmured. Rowan stopped on the stair. "Yeah." Vaelyra's gaze sharpened, and her voice lowered into something almost intimate. "If your hook is a lie, I will know." Rowan nodded, throat tight. "And if my hook is only a broom and a warm meal?" Vaelyra's lips curved, not quite a smile, more like a warning learning to be hope. "Then, Rowan, you may have caught something you do not understand. The spare room used to be Mara's sewing room." Rowan had never said that aloud to anyone, because speaking it made it real in a way grief hated. The room still smelled faintly of lavender and beeswax, even after 3 years. Rowan had tried to scrub it out once, furious at the way scent could resurrect a person and then abandon you again. Vaelyra stepped inside and went very still. Moonlight spilled through the small window, silvering dust motes in the air. The bed was narrow, the blanket folded tight. A basket of old cloth scraps sat under a chair like a patient animal waiting to be used. On the wall, pinned with a rusting tack, hung a strip of embroidered ribbon Mara had been working on when her fingers began to tremble too badly to guide the needle. Vaelyra's gaze snagged on the ribbon. "She made this." Rowan's mouth went dry. "Yeah." Vaelyra reached toward it, then stopped, fingers hovering a breath away, as if touching it would be trespass. Her obsidian scales glimmered subtly as she shifted, catching moonlight like a promise. "You keep her things," Vaelyra said softly. "I didn't know what to do with them," Rowan admitted. Throwing them away felt like murdering her twice. Vaelyra's amber eyes warmed. "In Drakanis holds, we keep the dead close. Not to suffer. To remember we owe them the life they cannot live." Rowan swallowed. "Do you have anyone?" Vaelyra's jaw tightened, and for the first time he saw something flicker behind her eyes, pain dressed as control. "Not here." Rowan nodded as if that answered everything, because it did. He pointed at the door latch. "I can add an interior lock tomorrow. Tonight. I can wedge a chair if you want." Vaelyra tested the latch with 2 fingers. Chair is enough. If you try the door, I will break it. And possibly you. Rowan huffed a laugh he didn't fully feel. Fair. He turned to leave, but Vaelyra's voice stopped him. Rowan. He paused in the doorway. I will clean your house, she said. Her tone was precise, like she was laying a brick in a foundation. But I do not clean like servants here. I do not lower myself. Rowan leaned against the frame. Then don't. Clean like it's yours. Like it matters. Vaelyra's pupils narrowed, a slit sharpening. It matters to you. Rowan nodded. It used to. Then it stopped. Vaelyra stared at him a moment longer, then looked down at her hands. Then I will make it matter again. The words hit Rowan like a shove. He wanted to tell her not to promise impossible things. He wanted to tell her he wasn't savable. Instead, he simply said, sleep. Vaelyra didn't lie down until Rowan had closed the door and taken 2 steps away, as if she needed to hear his retreat. When Rowan reached his own room, once theirs, he sat on the edge of the bed and listened. No sobbing. No footsteps. Just the quiet creak of an old building settling, and beneath it, the faintest sound of breath from the other room, careful and controlled. Rowan lay down fully clothed. Habit. Fear. He didn't know which. His eyes stayed open, fixed on the ceiling beams. Mara used to complain about those beams, how the wood knots looked like staring eyes. Rowan used to tease her, telling her the house was watching to make sure they kissed goodnight. Now the beams stared, and Rowan didn't know who they were judging. At some point, exhaustion dragged him under. He woke to a smell that didn't belong in his house anymore. Spice. Smoke. Warm grain. Rowan sat up so fast his head spun. For a heartbeat, he thought he'd dreamed Vaelyra. That the alley had been a hallucination grief had conjured to punish him. Then he heard the soft scrape of a pot being shifted on the stove, and the unmistakable rhythm of someone moving with purpose. He stumbled out into the hall. Downstairs, in the kitchen nook, Vaelyra stood over his stove like she'd been born in that sliver of space. Her hair was pulled back with a strip of cloth, horns silhouetted against the small flame. The sleeves of his old shirt, he recognized it, because he'd donated it to the rag pile, were rolled up on her arms. Blue forearms gleamed in the firelight, scales along her shoulders catching gold. She looked over her shoulder as if she'd been expecting him. I did not know what humans eat in mourning, she said, voice calmer than last night. So I made what I know. Porridge. And I cleaned. Rowan's gaze drifted. The counter was wiped. The sink emptied. The floor swept so thoroughly the wood grain looked newly alive. His tools, his scattered, chaotic tools, were lined up in a neat row on the bench like obedient soldiers. Rowan's chest tightened. It wasn't just clean. It looked inhabited again. Like a home instead of a shrine to absence. You didn't have to, Rowan managed. Vaelyra stirred the pot slowly. I ate your food. Slept in your dead mate's room. I would be less than beast if I did nothing. Rowan's hands curled. You're not a beast. Vaelyra paused, spoon hovering. The silence stretched until the pot's gentle bubbling felt like conversation. Finally, she said, in Drakanis' tongue, there is a word. Sathrian. It means, to be seen as person when you are certain you are monster. Rowan swallowed hard. Then, welcome to being seen. Vaelyra turned fully to face him. The porridge steam curled between them like ghost fingers. Her eyes glowed amber in the dim. Do not offer words you cannot keep, Rowan. Rowan opened his mouth to answer. And the front door rattled. Not a polite knock. A fist, hard enough to shake dust from the frame. Vaelyra's head snapped toward the sound, body shifting, weight settling into readiness. Rowan's heart dropped. Because Brineford had noticed. Rowan crossed the shop in 3 long strides, palms lifted in a calming gesture that fooled no one. The pounding came again, 3 heavy blows, impatient, entitled. The kind of knocking that assumed the world opened for it. "Rowan Thatch," a man's voice barked through the door. "Open up. We've got questions." Rowan froze with his hand on the latch. That voice, Harrow. City Watch, Dock District. A man who believed law was a club meant to keep certain people down and certain people comfortable. Behind Rowan, Vaelyra's porridge spoon clinked softly against the pot as she set it down. The sound was delicate. The air around it was not. Rowan leaned his forehead briefly against the doorframe, gathering himself the way you gather splinters before they go deeper. Then he opened. Harrow stood on the threshold in a damp cloak, 2 watchmen behind him. Their eyes slid immediately past Rowan, hungry for trouble. Harrow's gaze found Vaelyra in the kitchen nook and sharpened like a blade pulled free. "Well," Harrow said, slow and pleased. "Would you look at that?" Vaelyra didn't move. She didn't bare teeth. She simply watched, calm as deep water, as if men were weather, unavoidable, not worth fear. Rowan stepped sideways, blocking the direct line between Harrow and Vaelyra. "It's early," Rowan said. "If this is about the lock on the fishmonger's storage." "It's not," Harrow cut in, smiling without warmth. "We had a report. A large-horned woman seen entering your premises last night. Folks are concerned." "Folks," Rowan repeated, flat. Harrow's nostrils flared. "Don't get clever. You know what people are like. They hear Drakanis, and they think. Monster," Vaelyra said softly from the kitchen. Her voice carried like smoke, gentle, but impossible to ignore. "They think monster." One of the watchmen flinched at being addressed. Another made a quick, superstitious sign near his chest. Harrow's smile widened. "See? She knows." Rowan's jaw tightened. "She's not hurting anyone. Yet," Harrow said. "That's usually how it starts, isn't it? A man thinks he's special. Thinks he can keep a beast in his house and it'll behave. Then someone ends up dead and we have to scrape scales off cobblestones." Vaelyra's eyes narrowed, the slit pupils tightening. Not in anger, interest. Like she was studying a mechanism and deciding where it would break. Rowan forced his voice steady. "She's here to work. Cleaning." Harrow laughed. "Cleaning? You want me to believe a Drakanis, one of those mountain-blooded raiders, came to Brineford to sweep your floors?" Vaelyra stepped forward. The motion was smooth, controlled, almost graceful. Firelight kissed her cheek scales. She didn't loom, she simply existed at full height, and the room suddenly felt smaller. "I came," she said, "because I was hungry. And because he offered food without chains." Harrow's eyes flicked to Rowan. "Chains," he repeated. "Interesting word." Rowan's fists flexed. "What do you want, Harrow?" Harrow's gaze slid down Vaelyra's horns, her throat, her hands. "Assessing value. Assessing threat. I want you to understand the law. Drakanis are not citizens here. If she causes trouble, you are responsible. If she steals, you are responsible. If she so much as frightens a child." "I do not frighten children," Vaelyra said, and for the first time her voice held a quiet edge. "They frighten themselves with stories told by cowards." One of the watchmen muttered, "Hear that? Talking like she owns the street." Harrow lifted a hand, silencing him. Then he leaned closer to Rowan, lowering his voice so it became a private poison. "You're a widower, Rowan. Lonely men make stupid bargains. The dock gangs pay good coin for exotic help. You understand me? Rowan stared. The implication slid under his skin like a splinter. Vaelyra's head tilted. He is not lonely, she said, as if she could smell the word on Harrow's breath. He is grieving. Harrow's eyes snapped to her. And you're bold. Vaelyra smiled then, subtle, self-assured, the kind of smile that didn't ask permission. Bold is surviving. Harrow's face darkened. He stepped back, reassessing, then reached into his cloak and produced a folded notice. He slapped it onto Rowan's counter. Inspection, he said. Tomorrow. We'll make sure you're not harboring contraband. Or worse. Rowan's throat tightened. You can't. I can, Harrow said cheerfully. Because I'm the law, and you're a man with a shop that's always a month behind on its district fees. He nodded toward Vaelyra. And because people get nervous when horned women walk into respectable streets. He turned, boots clacking, the two watchmen following. At the door, Harrow paused and glanced back. Tell your cleaner, he said, voice loud again, performative, that Brineford doesn't tolerate dragons in its pantry. The door shut. The shop's air felt colder. Rowan stared at the inspection notice until the words blurred. His hands shook, not from fear of Harrow, he'd dealt with petty tyrants before, but from the sudden realization that letting Vaelyra stay meant inviting the city's teeth into his home. Behind him, Vaelyra exhaled slowly. They will return, she said. Rowan turned. Yeah. Vaelyra stepped close enough that Rowan could see the faint shimmer of her scales like tiny night sparks. If you send me away, she said carefully, I will understand. I will not, curse you. Rowan's chest ached. He imagined her back in the alley, curled into stone, trying to disappear. He imagined Mara's voice, be kind when it's hard. Rowan picked up the inspection notice, crumpled it in one sharp motion, then smoothed it again, flattening it with the heel of his hand like he could flatten the world's cruelty the same way. You're staying, he said. Vaelyra's eyes widened by the smallest fraction. Why? Rowan swallowed. Because if they're going to kick you, they'll have to kick me too. Vaelyra's throat worked. The gratitude that rose in her expression looked almost painful, like a muscle she hadn't used in years. She placed one hand lightly on the counter, as if grounding herself. Rowan, she whispered, in my bloodline, when a life is offered without demand, we answer. Rowan frowned. Answer how? Vaelyra's smile returned, quiet and dangerous in its sincerity. With devotion. With protection. With a debt that does not end. Rowan's stomach dipped. Vaelyra, I don't need. The window glass behind them tapped softly. Once. Twice. Rowan turned. A small shape stood outside on the sill. A child, wide-eyed, face smudged with soot, staring at Vaelyra like she'd found a storybook demon in real life. And the child lifted a shaky hand and pointed. Mr. Rowan, she whispered through the glass, there's men in the street, asking where the dragon woman sleeps. Rowan's blood went cold in a way stew could never fix. He hurried to the window, wiping condensation with his sleeve. Outside, the street was waking. Vendors setting out crates, fishermen dragging nets, women sweeping stoops. Ordinary life. But threaded through it were three men standing too still, too watchful. Dock knuckles and bad teeth. The kind who leaned on walls like they owned them. One of them held a coil of rope as casually as another man might hold bread. Rowan recognized them. Not by name, but by type. Brineford produced men like this the way damp produced mold. The child on the sill. Letty from upstairs, the landlord's granddaughter, looked terrified and pleased at the same time, like fear was exciting when you were small enough to believe adults could fix anything. Rowan opened the window a crack. Letty, go inside. Now. But. Now. His voice held the edge of a man who'd once been gentle and was learning other shapes. Letty flinched, nodded quickly, and vanished into the stairwell like a rabbit. Behind Rowan, Vaelyra moved without sound. He felt her presence at his shoulder like heat. "You have hunters," she murmured. "They're not yours," Rowan said automatically. "They're just Brineford's." Vaelyra's gaze stayed on the men outside. "Brineford hunts what it can sell." Rowan's jaw clenched. "Yeah." He stepped away from the window and pulled a small iron bar from under the counter, used for levering stubborn locks. He slid it into the bracket by the door. Not a real defense, but enough to slow a shove. Vaelyra watched him with a stillness that felt like coiled silk. "If they enter," she said, "do not stand in front of me." Rowan snorted. "That's kind of my specialty lately." Vaelyra's eyes flicked to him, amber catching lamplight. "Then you will die doing it." Rowan opened his mouth to argue, and the shop bell, muffled as it was, gave a soft, strangled jingle. Someone was at the door. Rowan's hand tightened on the iron bar. "We're closed," he called. A man's voice replied, slick as oil. "Just want to talk, Master Locksmith. About your new employee." Vaelyra's shoulders rose a fraction. Not fear, anger held on a leash. Rowan approached the door, keeping his body between Vaelyra and the threshold. He didn't open it. "No." A chuckle. "Come now. No need to be unfriendly. We heard you've got a Drakanis in there. Rare thing. Dangerous thing. But worth a lot to the right buyers." Rowan's mouth tasted like metal. "Get lost." The ropeholder's voice, rougher, impatient. "We can do this easy, old man, or we can do it hard." "I'm 36, Rowan snapped, then hated himself for the reflexive indignation. As if age was the point. The slick voice sighed. "Hard, then." The door shuddered under a shoulder hit. The iron bar held, barely. Dust puffed from the frame. Rowan's heart hammered. Vaelyra stepped closer. Her voice dropped into something low and steady, almost tender. "Rowan. Give me permission." Rowan glanced back. "Permission to what?" Vaelyra's smile sharpened at one corner. "To protect." Another slam. The bracket creaked. Rowan pictured Mara's sewing room. Mara's ribbon. The idea of that door splintering felt like an invasion of more than wood. Rowan swallowed. "No killing," he said, not sure if he was brave or stupid. Vaelyra blinked once, slow. "No killing," she agreed, as if humoring a child. The door crashed again, and this time the bar popped loose from the bracket with a metallic snap. The door flew inward. Two men stumbled into the shop, grinning like they'd already spent the profit. Ropeholder and Slick Voice, with a third behind them clutching a club. Their grins died when they saw Vaelyra. Not because she bared fangs. She didn't. She simply stood there, tall and radiant blue under lamplight, horns crowned in shadow, eyes glowing amber like lanterns of judgment. Her posture was relaxed, almost elegant, yet the air around her felt tighter, as if the room itself had decided to hold its breath. "Well," Slick Voice managed, trying to recover his confidence. "Ain't she pretty?" Rowan stepped forward. "Get out." The clubman laughed nervously. "You hear that? The locksmith thinks he's a hero." Vaelyra's gaze slid to Rowan. "May I?" she asked softly, as if asking to borrow a tool. Rowan's spine tingled. He hesitated half a beat. And Slick Voice made the mistake of stepping toward Vaelyra, rope in hand, eyes hungry. Vaelyra moved. She didn't lunge like an animal. She pivoted like a dancer, one foot sliding back, hips turning. Her hand shot out, caught the rope mid-coil, and with a flick of her wrist the rope snapped taut, yanking Slick Voice forward off balance. Before he could gasp, Vaelyra stepped into him, shoulder to chest, and guided his momentum into the counter. He hit hard. Tools jumped. A jar of brass pins spilled like metallic rain. Ropeholder cursed and swung the rope like a whip. Vaelyra ducked. Barely lowering her head, horns missing the rope by inches, and then she straightened into the ropeholder's space, palm to his wrist. There was a soft crack, not bone, but the sound of a joint being reminded of its limits. The ropeholder yelped, rope falling slack. Clubman raised his weapon. Rowan grabbed the iron bar and swung, not at the man's head, he wasn't that kind of person yet, but at the club itself. Metal rang. The club flew out of the man's hands and clattered across the floor. The shop filled with panting and the smell of spilled oil. Vaelyra leaned close to Slick Voice, her expression calm enough to be terrifying. "You will leave," she said, voice velvet over steel. "You will tell others, the dragon woman cleans here by choice." Slick Voice eyes rolled. "You ain't." Vaelyra pressed 2 fingers lightly against his throat. Not choking. Just indicating how easy it would be. His bravado collapsed. Okay. Saints, fine." Ropeholder cradled his wrist, face pale. "Which?" he whispered. Vaelyra's smile was small. "No. Hungry." Rowan pointed with the iron bar toward the door. "Out." They scrambled. Tripped over each other. Slipped on spilled brass pins. The last one yanked the door shut behind them and bolted like the street itself had teeth. For a moment, the shop was silent except for Rowan's heartbeat and the faint tick of the cooling stove. Rowan stared at Vaelyra. "You said no killing." Vaelyra looked down at her own hands as if surprised they were still gentle. "I did not kill." Rowan's breath shuddered out. Relief and terror braided together in his chest. Vaelyra turned to him, eyes glowing in the lamplight, and something in her expression softened, gratitude so deep it looked like a wound. "You gave me permission," she said. "That means," she swallowed. "That means you trusted me." Rowan tried to joke. "You did just redecorate my counter with brass pins." Vaelyra's lips twitched. Then she did something that made Rowan's stomach drop. She lowered herself to one knee. A Drakanis, horned, radiant, dangerous, kneeling on his workshop floor among spilled metal and sawdust. "Vaelyra, what are you?" "In my blood," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in it, "there is Vaetheren. A vow made when one is saved from being nothing." Rowan's throat went tight. "I didn't save you." Vaelyra lifted her gaze. Her amber eyes held him like hands. "You saw me. You fed me. You gave me a room that still smells of love. You said I am person." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, as if it hurt to believe. "I will clean your house, Rowan. But I will also stand between you and those who would harm you. I will be your shield, if you allow." Rowan's fingers trembled around the iron bar. "Vaelyra, I'm not asking you to be my." The front window shattered. Glass exploded inward in a glittering storm, and something dark and smoking landed on Rowan's workbench with a wet thud, an object wrapped in cloth, leaking a sharp copper stink. Rowan stared, frozen. Vaelyra rose in a single smooth motion, eyes flaring bright. Because tied around the cloth was a strip of paper with 3 words scrawled in dockhand ink. "Send her out."